Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a quiet corner of 19th century Germany, to a small home on Bahnhofstrasse, where the air is thick with lamp oil and winter hush. You're not here to witness a grand speech or a brilliant discovery. Not yet. Tonight, you're watching a boy who doesn't speak. Not at 2 years old. Not even fluently by 9. A boy who stares at light instead of people. A boy whose silence would one day ripple through space-time. So, before you settle in, gently tap that like button and subscribe only if this kind of storytelling truly speaks to you. And let us know in the comments, what time is it where you are and where are you listening from? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the gentle gloom of a late March afternoon in 1879. The walls are warm ivory, faintly cracked with time, and a faint tick from a wooden clock breaks the silence. You don't hear laughter. You don't hear words. You hear a kind of hush that feels more than quiet. It feels watched because he's there. Albert. Swaddled in blankets, eyes wide, already following the flicker of gaslight across the ceiling like it's asking him a question only he can hear. Months pass, then years. The house grows noisier. Pots clatter, violins hum in the corner. Arguments spark between parents about schooling business life. But Albert's still mostly silent. You watch him mouth words under his breath before saying them aloud, like he's double-checking their math. He repeats sentences to himself in a soft loop. Not a tantrum, not confusion, just calibration. As if language itself is a machine he must build from scratch before he dares use it. Some relatives whisper he might never speak. Others say he's slow, different perhaps a little lost. But you know. You can feel it in the way he stares at objects longer than necessary, deeper than expected. He's not ignoring the world. He's watching it unravel. He stumbles through early schooling. The teachers, stiff and mustache, don't care for children who challenge routine. You're there in the cold classroom where little Albert tilts his head during prayers, not out of defiance, but out of curiosity. Why pray facing east? Why believe what hasn't been proven? He doesn't ask with anger. He just asks. One day his father gives him something small, but world-shifting, a pocket compass. You hold your breath as the child's fingers wrap around it. He turns it slowly, watches the needle tremble. And then for the first time, you see his eyes widen, not with fear or confusion, but with awe. The needle moves. But why? There's no string, no hand, no push. Just invisible forces. That's the moment. You can almost hear the click inside his mind. Not a word, but a decision. He must know why. And quietly, like light slipping through shutters, the questions begin. Not loud ones. Not the kind that interrupt dinner. They come silently spinning inside a boy who rarely raises his voice. What is motion? What is space? Why does light act the way it does? Most children ask, why, and forget by bedtime. But you feel it, Einstein never lets go. It's not all magical, of course. He has tantrums too, emotional swings that storm through the house when routine is broken or logic feels out of reach. He can be stubborn, solitary, even sharp-tongued with peers. You catch him snapping once at a cousin who tries to simplify a story, but that's not how it really works. He insists, eyes burning. He wants accuracy, not approval. You begin to notice his silences aren't shy. They're selective. His mind is already tuning out the noise of the world and tuning into something deeper, something constant, like that compass needle always pointing somewhere, even when no one understands why. One gentle joke his uncle tells behind closed doors. With Albert, you don't start a conversation. You launch an experiment, and he's not wrong. Every dinner table debate becomes a small laboratory. Every bedtime question becomes a launch pad into something cosmic. Still, the world around him doesn't quite know what to do with a child who thinks in puzzles and talks in pre-tested phrases. His teachers write him off. His peers call him absent. But you stay close. You see it. You feel the momentum. In this quiet beginning, nothing explodes. No one cheers. No spotlight falls from the sky. Instead, you feel the slow turning of something immense inside someone small, like a black hole forming in silence. And even though the boy still barely speaks in public, you can sense it in his posture, in his steady breath at night. He's not slow. He's loading. You're older now, still young, still small, but the questions are growing taller than you. Your words have finally arrived, but not in a flood. They come in deliberate, careful drips, like clock hands ticking through fog. You've started speaking, but not for noise. You speak only when the sentence has been rehearsed, when the thought feels built. Others notice. You're not shy. You're constructing. You walk through the family apartment in Munich, stepping around violins, the smell of ink, and the subtle chaos of a household that doesn't quite understand you. They love you, yes, but they don't always get you. Your mother wants you to pursue music. Your father wants you to follow in his footsteps, electrical business, practical things. But you're busy watching the sun fall on the windowsill, wondering if light is a wave or a particle. And it's not just light. You start seeing secrets everywhere. Your younger sister, Maya, becomes your closest observer, your quiet shadow. She laughs when you get lost in thought over the movement of a pendulum, or when you ask why sugar dissolves faster in hot tea. To most, these are tiny things. But for you, they are everything. You carry a notebook, now just a scrap of paper, stitched together. But to you, it feels sacred. Inside, observations, doodles, numbers that make no sense to anyone else yet. You once draw the arc of a thrown stone just to imagine how gravity makes it curve. No one asked you to. You just needed to. In school, things feel rougher. You sit in stiff wooden desks under teachers who march through facts like generals on parade. They don't like questions. You like nothing but questions. And so the clash begins. You correct a teacher once about a math principle not to show off, but because you know it matters. You're told to sit down. That memory lingers like a bitter taste. One teacher even writes, "This boy will never amount to anything." You read it once in passing. You don't cry, but you never forget. So you begin to turn inward. You retreat into a world of thought experiments, your own internal theater. You imagine yourself riding alongside a beam of light. If you could travel that fast, would the wave freeze beside you? Would time pause? Would you still be? These are not the questions on your exams, but they're the only ones that keep you awake. Your classmates begin to whisper. Some call you dreamy, others strange. A few are kind, drawn to your odd warmth, your unexpected humor, your relentless honesty. But most, they don't understand why you can't just follow the lesson, or why you always seem to be somewhere else. At home you find escape in music. Your mother's insistence on violin practice slowly becomes your own private ritual. You don't always care for the rules of music, but sometimes when you forget the notes and just follow the feeling, something clicks. You lose yourself in sound like you do in equations, not as performance, but as play. One day, a family friend visits a medical student named Max Talmud. He brings you books, each one heavier than the last. You devour them. Geometry, philosophy, even Kant. You're still not a teenager, but you're wrestling with the architecture of reason itself. You begin to realize that the world isn't fixed, that laws, if understood deeply, can be bent. A gentle joke lands in the family kitchen one evening. Your father chuckles, telling a guest, "Our Albert, he doesn't memorize. He understands, or he doesn't care at all." Everyone laughs. You smile too, because it's true. You're not good at remembering what time dinner starts, but you can hold an abstract system of forces in your mind, like a sculpture made of light. Still, there are struggles. You fail entrance exams. You misplace personal belongings. You forget appointments. You clash with authority, always politely but firmly. You question religious doctrine, school policy, and grading systems. Not to rebel, just because they don't make sense. You begin to crave something else somewhere less rigid, less loud. You set your sights on Switzerland, where the education system breathes a little freer. You dream of attending the Polytechnic in Zurich, a place where maybe, just maybe, your way of thinking won't feel like a flaw. But when the exam day comes, you stumble. You ace the math and physics, but fail the other subjects. Everyone's disappointed, except you. You're more annoyed than crushed. You know what you're capable of. You just need another try. And so, with your parents' quiet support, you enroll in a smaller Swiss school to bridge the gap. Their life feels softer, the teachers less rigid, the landscape wider. You walk among hills and begin to see not just how the world works, but how it could feel to belong in it. It's not instant success. You still struggle with some subjects. You still miss social cues. But your mind, it's sharpening. Your confidence grows, not in yourself as a student, but in yourself as a thinker. You start to realize something profound. The world doesn't need you to fit in. It needs you to see what no one else can. The streets of Munich shimmer in your memory, like a watercolor left out in the rain. Blurry, bittersweet, full of early sunlight and quiet discomfort. You walk them now in worn shoes and a school bag that feels heavier with expectations than books. The city pulses with invention. Gas lamps flicker above cobbled sidewalks. Electric wires snake between buildings like modern vines. But inside you, it's not electricity that sparks. It's light itself. Light as a question. Light as a mystery that doesn't go away. You're 15, tall for your age, hair already a bit wild. A teacher asks the class to recite rules by memory, and you pause not out of confusion, but because your brain immediately rewrites the rule. "That's not quite right," you say softly. The room freezes. A boy who barely spoke a few years ago now gently corrects the curriculum. It does not go over well. School begins to feel like a long, slow suffocation. Rigid structure, uniform thoughts, recitations with no wonder. You sit at your desk, eyes drifting upward, not in daydream, but in protest. You're trying to escape the gray wallpaper of the lecture hall and follow that old thought again. What if you could ride on a beam of light? Would time stand still? Would color vanish? These are not the kinds of questions welcomed on tests. And yet you don't resent knowledge. You love it. You just hate how it's delivered, cold, mechanical, unquestioned. You once say that schools are like factories, that education, at least the way it's given, nearly strangles the thing it's meant to nourish. A gentle joke follows you for years. Albert didn't drop out of school. He politely walked away before it bored him to death. At home, things grow complicated. Your father's electrical business is faltering. Money grows thin, and conversations grow sharp. You pace the hallway violin under one arm, overhearing talk of relocation. Maybe Italy, maybe something drastic. And just like that one day, your parents decide to leave for Milan, but you stay behind, alone, for months, a teenager in a city without his family, and still somehow chasing the nature of light. During those weeks of solitude, you write letters home, not just updates, but philosophies. You pour out your frustration with road education, your hunger for deeper understanding, and your worry that maybe the world isn't ready for how your brain works. You miss your sister. You miss conversation that isn't laced with evaluation. One night after failing to sleep, you step outside. The stars above Munich blur, just slightly from the haze of oil lamps and late smoke, but you find a dark corner. You tilt your head, stare upward, and whisper to yourself, what are you? Not to a person, not to a god, but to the sky. You want to know what governs it, what holds it all together, what unseen hands keep the planet circling, and the speed of light so stubbornly constant. You don't cry often. But that night, you feel something slip from your eyes. Not sadness, not joy, just pressure. The pressure of knowing your mind is asking questions that no one around you is answering. And yet, you don't stop. You can't. Eventually, you reunite with your family in Italy, but something in you has shifted. You've grown weary of permission. You apply directly to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich again. You're younger than the others. Still lacking in French. Still rough around the academic edges. But this time, you pass. Not all of it, but enough. And so at 16, you pack your few belongings and board a train into a country with wider mountains, broader thinking, and perhaps finally a chance to breathe. But before you leave Munich for good, you walk the old streets one last time. Past the classroom where you were scolded for thinking too hard. Past the alley where you trace shadows to guess the sun's angle. Past the window where light once danced across your wall like a secret trying to tell itself. You pause. You look up. The stars are a little clearer tonight. You still don't know exactly what light is, but you're going to chase it anyway, and it will take your whole life. Zurich welcomes you with soft hills, winding streets, and a sense of quiet possibility. You're still young, but already walking like a man who lives more in his thoughts than in the world. The Swiss Federal Polytechnic. What a name. What a mouthful. Feels like a cathedral for thinking. And for the first time, you feel less like an outsider and more like a late arriving citizen of a country that finally makes room for you. Your classmates are older, more polished. They speak French, smoothly, wear tailored jackets, know the rules of polite conversation. Your coat's a little wrinkled, your hair never seems to behave, and your German accent makes your French sound like it's trying to escape your mouth before it's fully formed. But you laugh at yourself. You always do. You joke that you're not a misfit, just a future relic. One professor eyes you with quiet suspicion. He doesn't like how you challenge assumptions in class, doesn't like how you question derivations, doesn't like how you refuse to memorize what you can read-arrive in 5 minutes. You learn quickly that even in open-minded Zurich, there are limits. There are rules about how to be brilliant, and you unfortunately keep refusing to read the instruction manual. Still, you thrive in strange ways. You sleep little. You wander long. You skip lectures to study what actually excites you. Maxwell's equations, the speed of light. The idea that time might not be constant. You talk to classmates about these ideas late into the night sometimes, until the candles die down, and only the cold air reminds you that the world still turns. And then there's her, Mileva Maric, a fellow student, brilliant, Serbian, one of the few women allowed into the program. You're drawn to her mind first, the way she stares at a blackboard as if it's hiding a personal insult. You exchange notebooks, equations, dreams, coffee, glances. Eventually you fall for her awkwardly intensely, like someone falling not into love, but into gravity. Your parents disapprove. They don't understand her. They don't like her health, her accent, her posture. You ignore them. You always have. Because you see something in her that you recognize someone else who doesn't quite fit the mold, but fits your rhythm. You write her letters filled with physics and longing. You call her Dolly. You imagine a future together, maybe a quiet life, some children, a house full of books and blackboards. The future looks foggy, but in your mind, it's framed with sunlight and paper covered in equations. Academically, things don't go quite to plan. You graduate, yes, but not with honors. That professor who never liked you, he makes sure your recommendations are tepid. The best students get assistantships. You get nothing, not even a teaching post. You spend months drifting, unemployed, rejected, a graduate with revolutionary ideas and zero job offers. You joke with your friends that the world just isn't ready for your handwriting. But inside, the pressure builds. You have a partner now, a child on the way, dreams that aren't being funded, and then relief. A friend pulls strings, writes letters, makes introductions. You land a job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. Not glamorous, not academic, but it pays. It gives you hours of stability. And ironically, it gives you time. Because in between the dull thud of bureaucratic paperwork and the slow tick of office clocks, you think constantly. You scratch notes on margins. You run thought experiments between patent descriptions. You pace the office during lunch breaks, lost in a world where light bends, clocks shift, and simultaneity begins to feel like an illusion. It's strange, isn't it? How this small gray office, tucked away in a city no one associates with revolution, becomes the cradle of one of the greatest shifts in human thought. You come home to Mileva in the evenings. She's tired. You're both tired. Sometimes you argue. Sometimes you hold each other in long silences. There's a baby now. Liesel, though history loses track of her. Some scholars believe she died in infancy. Others say she was adopted. You rarely speak of her again. That silence becomes a quiet scar you carry. You never stop thinking, but part of you stops feeling freely for a while. Still, you keep scribbling. You work late into the night on your papers. You don't have a laboratory, or funding, or a title. You have only questions and a pen. But oh, the questions. What happens to time when you move near the speed of light? Is mass just frozen energy? What if E, something more than a symbol on paper? You write. You revise. You rewrite again. 4 papers take shape over 1 year. Each one a detonation. You don't know it yet, but the world is about to wake up. And your name is about to be written in stars. The walls of the patent office in Bern are beige and unremarkable. The desk creaks when you lean on it. The window sticks in winter, and the papers you process daily range from the trivial to the absurd devices to butter toast more efficiently, contraptions to boil water, sideways clocks that nobody will ever build. But in the quiet between rubber stamps, your mind is nowhere near these walls. You're riding beams of light again. It's 1905, and you're 26 years old. You've been here for nearly 5 years, long enough that the other clerks joke you'll retire behind that desk. But you know better. You're not here to serve the machine of bureaucracy. You're here to borrow its stillness, its silence, to think without interruption. The day is quiet. You mark the time a little differently than others, not in hours, but in ideas. You've been carrying 4 of them like stones in your pocket. One about how particles move. One about how light behaves. One about how mass and energy are not opposites, but twins. And one that might just redefine how time itself works. You work during the day. At night, you scribble in the margins of life. Your apartment is cluttered ink-stained papers spilling from drawers, chalk dust on the floor, half-drunk cups of coffee growing philosophical. Mileva's there, watching you with a tired kind of loyalty. She knows the world doesn't quite see what you see. She wants it to. You want it to. But first, the math must sing. You send the first paper off a new way of looking at particles suspended in fluids. It seems simple, but it quietly confirms the existence of atoms, something still debated at the time. You don't brag. You just fold the paper and walk it to the mailbox like it's an errand, not a spark. The second light behaves as both wave and particle. You suggest something few dare say, that maybe Newton and Maxwell weren't entirely complete. That light itself travels in quanta-tiny packets that explain the photoelectric effect. It's a puzzle piece the world doesn't know it's missing yet. You send it off too. The third one is heavier, special relativity. You explain that time isn't universal, that simultaneity is relative, that the faster you move, the slower time ticks. And perhaps most daring of all, the speed of light is the same for everyone, no matter how fast they move. You feel like you're setting off fireworks in a field no one's watching, but still you light them anyway. And then comes the fourth, shorter, sharper. It sneaks up like a whisper, just a few pages, just one equation, E equals mc squared. You pause after writing it, not because it's poetic, but because it's inevitable. You've climbed the mountain, and at the summit, there it is quiet, clean, almost too simple. Energy is mass. Mass is energy. The universe, it turns out, is convertible. You don't celebrate. You don't even tell many people. You're still just Albert, still getting paid to judge the technical feasibility of corn huskers and stove valves. You make a gentle joke about it to a friend. I'm just a patent clerk with a habit of thinking too long in the bathtub. But the papers are published. The scientific world stirs, slowly at first, then quicker. A few physicists write to you with questions, others with awe, still others with skepticism. But the buzz begins. You're invited to lecture. You accept awkwardly. You're not used to crowds. You stumble over introductions, wave your hands too much, forget your notes and speak from the heart, but they listen. They really listen. One day, you hear someone refer to 1905 as your annus mirabilis, your miracle year. You smile, but you don't really believe in miracles. Only in clarity, only in persistence. Meanwhile, the rest of your life remains ordinary. Bills, letters. A newborn son, Hans Albert, now filling the apartment with tiny gasps and cries. You hold him sometimes like he's made of equations. You wonder, will he ever see the world the way you do? In the margins of your notebooks, you still draw diagrams, still run mental experiments, still question your own work. You're never quite satisfied. You're always circling something deeper. And here's a curious thing. Even after rewriting the foundations of space and time, you still feel like an outsider. You don't wear the robes of academia. You haven't yet earned your doctorate. Your name is known now, but only faintly, like a star just beginning to rise. You walk home one evening through the streets of Bern. The gas lamps flicker in the mist. Your thoughts drift, as they always do, not toward fame or recognition, but back to that compass you held as a boy. The one that first taught you the world was full of invisible forces. You didn't understand them then. You still don't. Not fully. But you've learned how to ask. And the universe, it seems, has started whispering back. It's still 1905. The world doesn't stop spinning just because you've rewritten its rules. The bells still toll and burn. The trams still rattle past your window. The patent office still expects you to be on time. But inside your small apartment, tucked between the scent of ink and cradle milk, a quiet revolution is taking place. You wake up one morning to a letter from Annalen der Physik, the respected physics journal. They've published your latest paper. Again. That's the third this year. The fourth is already being typeset. You read the letter once, then twice. But you don't smile. Not really. You just breathe deeper. Like someone who's been underwater too long and finally breaks the surface. The scientific world hasn't quite grasped what's happened. Not yet. Your name appears in footnotes, murmured in cafes, where physicists debate the foundations of reality. Some say your ideas are elegant. Others call them impossible. A few whisper that they might be true. You don't argue. You're not here for debate. You're here to understand. Still, it's surreal. You, the clerk. The boy who spoke late. The student who skipped class. The man with no lab, no title, no formal post, no loyal army of assistants have now proposed that time isn't constant mass, is stored energy, and light behaves in ways no one expected. You've taken the greatest assumptions of Newton, Galileo, and Maxwell and shifted them. Not destroyed. Just bent. Like light through gravity. Like time near the edge of speed. And still, no one throws you a parade. No confetti rains down. You make yourself tea, change the baby's blanket, and head to work. At the office, you review a patent for a new kind of bottle cap. You nod politely. But inside, your thoughts are racing. If time can dilate, if simultaneity is relative, then what does now even mean? You pause to write that down. It's not always glorious. Sometimes your coworkers ask why you look so distracted. You laugh it off. Tell them you were imagining riding on a beam of light again. They chuckle. They don't know you've already mapped it, published it, changed everything. You try to keep things normal. You help Mileva around the house. You carry Hans Albert in your arms and rock him slowly, sometimes humming off key. You miss your daughter Liesel, though you never speak of her now. It's a silence that settles between you and Mileva like dust. Still in these moments, as your son's breath slows against your chest, you wonder, will this world be any kinder to him? You don't seek praise, but praise starts arriving anyway. One physicist writes you in astonishment. Another asks for clarification on your strange moving clock idea. You politely respond to each one, your handwriting precise, almost stubbornly neat. You never gloat. But your fingers do shake just slightly when you realize they're beginning to believe me. Still, there are doubts. One professor calls your ideas mathematical fiction. Another claims your thought experiments are too abstract to reflect the physical world. You expect this. You've always known change comes slowly, like the way stars shift across the sky, visible only when you keep watching. One evening, you walk the streets of Bern alone. The summer has passed. Leaves scatter in the wind. You glance up at the moon and wonder how much slower does time move there? You picture twins, one on Earth, one rocketing through space, returning home to find they've aged differently. It's absurd and true and quietly devastating. A dog barks nearby, someone laughs in the distance, and you keep walking because the work isn't done. You're already thinking beyond special relativity. You sense there's something missing, a bigger picture. What about gravity? What about acceleration? You have glimpses like cracks in a door, but the light behind it is still too bright to stare at directly. Mileva watches you grow quieter. Not colder, just more interior. You sit for hours, motionless pencil hovering over a blank sheet. She doesn't interrupt. She knows this is how it works. She once joked that your mind isn't like other minds. It's a room full of mirrors, each reflecting an idea back at itself until it becomes real. One night, you look at her and say, without warning, "I think time isn't what we think it is. I think it bends." She nods, slowly, carefully. She doesn't laugh. You hold her hand in the dark, and you both sit in silence. The city sleeps around you. This is the miracle year, but not because anyone crowned you. Not because the world turned to look, but because you didn't stop. You kept walking step by step through fogged-out diapers, desk jobs, rejection, and loneliness, because something in you refused to leave the question unanswered. And now the questions are answering back. You drift to sleep with an unfinished equation beside your pillow, and the soft breath of your son filling the room like a lullaby. You never set out to be famous. You set out to understand. Yet now, something curious is happening. Your name, once scribbled quietly at the top of a manuscript sent in a brown envelope, is starting to travel. First in whispers, then in print. It moves from one lecture hall to another, carried by professors with lifted eyebrows and students who quote your equations like poetry. You're still at the patent office, but the room feels different now. You haven't changed desks. The papers haven't changed thickness. The radiator still hisses on cold days. But there's something in the air, a tension, a sense that the world outside is leaning ever so slightly in your direction. You hear from a university in Bern they'd like you to lecture. You smile, politely say yes, and then spend the next 2 days nervously rereading your own papers as if they were written by someone else. You've never really liked public speaking. You once joked to a friend that you'd rather explain space-time to a cat than to a crowded room. The first lecture arrives. You stand before a room full of polished shoes and skeptical eyes. You're wearing the same suit you've worn to work all year. It's a little wrinkled. Your notes are handwritten and slightly smudged. You begin to speak softly at first. You talk not of fame or revolution, but of trains and clocks, of moving observers and simultaneity. You walk them gently into the idea that time is not what they think it is. Some nod. A few squint. One man leans back in his chair, arms crossed, mouth tense. You pause mid-sentence and smile. You look like someone who just lost their watch, you say. The room laughs, and for a moment, so do you. That night, you walk home through snow. Your shoes crunch against frozen cobblestone, and your breath forms little clouds that drift behind you. You wonder, do snowflakes fall at the same speed, regardless of how fast I walk through them? Another question. Another quiet joy. Your correspondence begins to grow. Letters from physicists, letters from strangers, letters from confused students and cautious admirers. You respond to each with a kind of warmth that surprises even yourself. You don't seek disciples. You want dialogue. But not all reactions are kind. Some academics dismiss your work as philosophical rambling. One prominent figure calls relativity a beautiful dream, but nothing more. You don't retaliate. You don't even reply. You simply keep writing, keep calculating, keep trusting that truth doesn't need defending. It only needs clarity. The lectures multiply. One in Zurich, another in Prague. Invitations begin arriving from cities you've never been to asking you to explain ideas that no one quite believed when you first wrote them. At home, things shift more slowly. Mileva grows tired. 2 children now. The rent is heavier. The hours are longer. You love her still, but sometimes the words between you feel like equations in a foreign language. You try to connect. You take long walks together, hold her hand as the boys chase each other through leaves. But your mind drifts, always drifts. You feel guilty. You tuck it beneath your jokes. The trouble with being married to a physicist, you once say, is you never really know when he's in the room. There are arguments about money, about your obsession, about her fading place in your equations. You don't know how to fix it. You only know how to solve for X. Meanwhile, newspapers start printing your name. Not often, not boldly, but it's there. Albert Einstein proposes new understanding of light. Young physicist reimagines time and motion. There's even a cartoon of you once wild-haired nose, long eyes, comically wide. You pin it to your wall. You laugh, but inside you wonder, are they seeing the mind or just the myth forming around it? One evening, you walk past a bookshop. In the window, you see your name on a spine. It's not your book, not yet, but someone else explaining you. You stare for a long moment. Part of you wants to walk in and correct every page. Part of you just wants to go home and hold your son. You do neither. You keep walking, past the shops, past the train station, past the alley, where you once calculated how sound changes for moving observers. The world is beginning to echo you back, but gently, cautiously. You're not a celebrity. Not yet. You're still the man who walks in mismatched socks, who hums symphonies under his breath, who absent-mindedly stirs tea with the wrong end of the spoon. You're still the thinker who forgets his address when asked. Still, the dreamer who believes that truth is always simpler than we expect, but far stranger than we imagine. And so, you return to your desk. The fame can wait. The questions won't. The page is blank again. The pencil hovers. Somewhere in the silence, you ask yourself, what if gravity isn't a force but a curve? And just like that, the next revolution begins. The sun, for all its warmth, holds secrets. And you still, pacing, still scribbling, still curling questions like smoke in your mind, you begin to suspect it may reveal something extraordinary. Not through its light, but through its shadows. You're no longer a patent clerk. Now finally a professor. A title. A chalkboard. Students who quote you. Peers who now hesitate before dismissing your ideas. But your clothes haven't changed much. Nor has your handwriting or the way you misplace your notes in your own briefcase. Fame hasn't made you louder, just more focused. You sit at your desk in Zurich or Prague or Berlin. By now it's a carousel of cities and lectures and stare at the same symbols you've chased since you were a teenager. But something's different. You no longer want just to describe motion or light. You want to describe everything, not in fragments, not in formulas isolated like islands. You want unity. One theory to stitch together the stars and the stones. You want to understand gravity not as a force that pulls, but as a shape that bends. The work is slow. Your math is good, but you know your limits. You reach out to old friends, mathematicians whose minds move like rivers over geometry. You speak in symbols and curves. You struggle with tensors. You pace across your study with fists full of rejected pages. And then, a glimmer. You begin to see it, not gravity pulling planets toward the sun, but the sun bending the space around it, and the planets falling along that curve. A marble rolling across a stretched sheet. That's the image. Not push, not pull. Fall. You scribble equations like a man possessed. Field equations. Differential geometry. A new language. And finally, in 1915, you present your general theory of relativity. It's heavy, bold, impossible, beautiful. You say that mass tells space how to curve, and space tells mass how to move. You say that time itself is not constant. It stretches, flexes, slows, near gravity like a heartbeat in a dream. You say that even light can bend, not because it wants to, but because the space it moves through bends beneath it. But theories are easy to ignore without proof. And that's when the stars return. You suggest an experiment during a total solar eclipse. The sun's massive gravity should bend the light of distant stars, shifting their apparent positions in the sky. If true, it would confirm your predictions and make your theory not just elegant, but real. Years pass. War comes. Europe shudders. Letters slow. People starve. And still, you wait for the sun to hide. Finally, in 1919, 2 expeditions, one to Brazil, one to Africa, set out with telescopes and clockwork hopes. They capture the eclipse. They measure. They wait. Months later, the results are in. The stars have shifted. Not much. Just enough. You're in Berlin when the news reaches you. A telegram, a whisper, and then an avalanche. Overnight, the world knows your name. Einstein overturns Newton. One headline reads, "Light bends. Time bends. So does history." Your face appears in newspapers, beside popes and kings. People stop you in the street. Photographers call for portraits. Children point. You laugh softly at all of it. You once couldn't get a job in academia. Now you're being called the new Copernicus. One gentle joke begins to circle. Only 2 people in the world truly understand Einstein's theory, and Einstein isn't always one of them. You laugh louder at that one. You like that joke best. Still, it's a strange kind of fame. People misquote you. They ask you about things you never said. Some believe you're a magician. Others think you're a danger. Some think you've unlocked the secret to the universe. You haven't. You've only peeked behind the curtain. And yet, something else begins to stir. Behind all the praise and confusion, you feel something deeper relief. Not for yourself, but for truth. For the idea that clarity, patient, persistent clarity, can still pierce the noise of the world. One night, you walk home under the stars, as you often do. This time, you look up and smile, not at their beauty, but at the fact that they're still there, even if their light has bent. You whisper to yourself, the universe has curves. And it has listened. You are no longer just a physicist. You are an orbit now pulled in every direction. Invitations to lecture pile high on your desk. Letters arrive by the dozen, requests for autographs, desperate appeals from strangers, questions scribbled by schoolchildren. A woman once mails you a lock of hair, insisting it must share the same frequency as your thoughts. You smile politely, then carefully file it under miscellaneous oddities. It's 1920-something, and you live now in Berlin. Your office is grander, your windows taller, your schedule unbearable. You speak at universities in Vienna, London, Amsterdam, even Tokyo. On trains and lecture halls, on transatlantic steamships, you repeat your ideas again and again, but always with a different metaphor, always trying to meet each mind where it stands. But you miss the silence of the patent office. Now every word you speak feels like a signal beamed into orbit. And the return echoes. Exhausting. Even in fame, you carry your oddities with pride. You refuse to wear socks. You sometimes forget you're holding a pipe mid-sentence and ash it into your teacup. When they ask why you dress so simply, you reply, "If I owned more than one type of suit, I'd have to waste thought deciding which one to wear." You do not mean to be eccentric. You simply do not have room for the trivial. You still walk alone in the early mornings, especially after long trips. Your thoughts unfurl best in motion. You often mumble equations under your breath, to the amusement of birds and passers-by. Once a young man approaches and asks if you're composing music. You grin, only the kind with very strange time signatures. But something aches inside you now. Mileva is gone, not just in distance, but in every way. Your marriage unraveled quietly like a book whose spine weakens over time. The boys remain with her. You write to them often. You try to be present in ink, if not in person, but you know fatherhood was always a constellation you couldn't quite map. You orbit it with love, with guilt, with absence. In your solitude, you write more letters. Hundreds. To scientists, to poets, to children. One little girl writes that her teacher told her only Einstein could explain the universe. "But I'm only 10, she says, so I think I'll wait till I'm 11. You write back, "Don't wait. Ask now." Your eyes grow tired more easily now. You squint more in photographs, but your mind still on fire. You speak often of peace, of compassion, of how the world must use reason to protect what is fragile. But not everyone wants a philosopher in a physicist's suit. Some want a hero, others a villain. You are both, and neither. There's a joke among journalists. If Einstein sneezes, Europe trembles. You hear this once in Paris, and laugh so hard your tea spills across your notes. You also begin to write about religion, not doctrine, but wonder. You tell an interviewer that you do believe in God, but not the one who concerns himself with fates and punishments, only the one who reveals himself in the order of the universe. That line becomes famous, quoted, misquoted, argued over. But to you, it's not meant to stir controversy. It's meant to describe your awe. Because beneath the formulas, beyond the papers, there is still that boy watching the compass needle spin with no visible force. That boy never left. And in quiet moments, in the space between obligations, you still visit him. In your study filled with books and dust and letters you'll never finish answering, you run your fingers across your violin. You play late sometimes. Not for applause, not for anyone, just to feel the shape of silence wrapped in sound. One evening, you perform for a small group. A friend jokes a scientist by day, a musician by night. What would you be? If not either, you reply, a postman. At least then, I'd still be delivering messages. Everyone laughs. But your eyes drift briefly toward the window, toward the stars, toward the space where your thoughts always return. The equations still call to you. But the loneliness, it lingers louder now. The flags are changing again. You feel it in the newspapers, in the radio broadcasts, in the way the wind carries tension through the streets of Berlin. It's 1933. The world is humming a darker tune, and you know that hum well It's the same frequency as fear. At first, you think it will pass. You've seen turmoil before. You've watched nations wobble like spinning tops, watched men shout nonsense and call it truth. But this time, the shadows gather faster. More organized, more venomous. You're Jewish. And now that simple fact is being weaponized. Your lectures are canceled. Your name is smeared in nationalist papers. A headline reads, "Einstein, the enemy of German science." Your portrait is burned in effigy by students who once lined up to shake your hand. One article claims that even the laws of physics should be cleansed of Jewish influence. You stare at that sentence for a long time, less in anger, more in sorrow. And then the decision becomes clear. You leave Germany. It's not a dramatic escape. You don't flee in the night. You simply pack a small suitcase, kiss a friend's hand, and walk away from a country that once nurtured your genius, but now rejects your existence. You board a ship. The sea is cold and vast, but you sleep well for the first time in months. There's a certain calm in motion, a relief in leaving behind a storm that is not yet fully broken. You land in America, New York. The skyline is a kind of geometry, all its own steel, rising like exclamation points. People recognize you almost immediately. Einstein, a dock worker, shouts, pointing as if he's seen a constellation move. You're offered posts, Harvard, Caltech, but you choose Princeton. It's quieter, more trees, fewer spotlights. You don't want prestige. You want a place to think. At the Institute for Advanced Study, your office is simple. A chalkboard, a desk, a window that looks out on whispering leaves. You settle in, but you do not rest. Because while you've escaped one threat, the storm follows you in letters and headlines. Your colleagues across Europe, scientists, friends, are being silenced, jailed, killed. You try to help. You write letters of recommendation. You raise funds. You speak out cautiously but clearly about the growing danger in Germany. Some listen, many don't. You also speak of peace. You always have. But now, your voice trembles slightly when you do. Not from fear, but from urgency. One night, you sit in your study with your pipe and a letter from an old friend now hiding in Belgium. They are burning books, he writes. Yours too. You set the letter down. You stare out the window. The exile is not just physical, it's emotional. You've left your homeland, but also your language, your history, your youth. You feel older now. Your hair has turned fully white. Your gait is slower, but your mind still bright, still relentless. You begin to focus not just on science, but on humanity, on ethics, on responsibility. You write essays. You join civil rights efforts. You speak against nationalism and prejudice wherever you can. Some call you naive, others prophetic. Once a reporter asks you if you regret leaving Germany, you pause. Then you say, "I regret that it was necessary." But you miss it, don't you? You miss the river in Zurich, the warmth of lectures in Vienna, the soft light through your Berlin study window. You miss the places where your thoughts were born. Even now, surrounded by adoration awards, honorary degrees, you feel like a man with no country. One day, you sit alone in your Princeton kitchen, peeling an apple with a dull knife, and say to no one in particular, "I am a displaced equation, still trying to solve itself." You chuckle, a quiet, sad chuckle, and take another bite. But you do not stop working. You write to President Roosevelt, "The war is coming." You've heard whispers that Germany is developing a terrible new kind of bomb. You do not want to be involved in war. You are not a politician, not a general, but you are a physicist. And you understand what E, she, MC2 could mean if twisted. So you write the letter, not because you want to help build the weapon, but because you believe the greater danger is silence. And with that signature, another echo begins, one that will follow you for the rest of your days. The gates of Princeton are quiet, ivy-covered, and respectful. You walk them daily, coat flapping gently in the wind hair, unconcerned with the weather. The students pause when they see you unsure whether to wave or whisper. Most choose to whisper. You don't mind. You're used to being the question in the room. Your life here is slower now, but not idle. You wake early. You drink tea that's always slightly too cold. You sit at your desk with a pencil and pad still chasing the unifying idea, the theory that would tie it all together. Relativity, quantum mechanics, gravity, motion one, elegant equation to explain the fabric of existence. You call it the unified field theory. Others call it impossible. But you walk anyway. Every day after lunch, you stroll a well-worn path through the woods. Locals begin calling it Einstein's walk. Sometimes you go alone, sometimes with a visitor. The forest listens either way. You step slowly, hands behind your back, head tilted down. Occasionally you stop mid-path, lean on your cane, and stare at the air as if waiting for the next thought to arrive. It usually does. You muse, now less about specific problems and more about beauty, harmony, the patterns beneath the chaos. You wonder if perhaps the universe is not only knowable, but elegant. You once write, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. And then you cross that sentence out, rewrite it again. You like how it sounds when read aloud. In these Princeton years, you become something stranger than a scientist, a symbol, an icon. Your name appears in advertisements you never approved. Your face is printed on novelty mugs. Children dress up as you for Halloween white wigs and all. A cartoon shows you poking at the cosmos with a yardstick. You laugh gently. You are not angry. You simply know how the world simplifies what it doesn't fully understand. Your correspondence now reaches absurd levels. You receive letters from school teachers, prisoners, philosophers, presidents. Some ask you about relativity. Others ask about God. A few send their own theories scrawled in shaky handwriting and enthusiastic diagrams. You read most of them. You reply to many. Sometimes just a sentence. Sometimes a full page. You believe in curiosity, even when it arrives in crayon. And still you play your violin, the same old instrument. The notes sometimes stumble your fingers, less sure than before, but the music still carries you over equations, over regret, over the soft ache of time passing faster than memory. You have friends here, fellow thinkers, chess partners, a neighbor who brings you coffee cake on Sundays. You cherish their company, but still retreat often into your own mind. Solitude for you has always been less a burden than a habitat. One gentle joke you often repeat, if I don't walk alone, how will I hear the silence think? And that silence continues to speak. You write essays on ethics, on race, on the future of mankind. You speak against war, against segregation, against the mechanization of thought. You sign petitions. You attend rallies. You give uncomfortable interviews. You are a scientist who refuses to sit still in his own discipline. Not everyone appreciates this. Some colleagues call you naive. Others dismiss your views as out-of-touch idealism, but you remain unshaken. The value of a man you once write should be seen in what he gives, not in what he is capable of receiving. You are still searching, not just for an equation, but for a truth that feels worthy of the cosmos. One morning, you pause mid-walk. The sun cuts through the trees like golden thread. You look up. For a moment, you forget your age, your status, even your name. You feel only the question again, the one that began it all. What moves the needle when no one touches it? And beneath that, an even quieter wonder. Is it possible the universe wants to be known? You smile, because even now, you don't know the answer. But you've never stopped listening. You don't wear lab coats. You never did. You've never stood behind the glass as test tubes boiled or metal hissed. You've never pulled a switch and waited for a countdown. And yet, your name is forever etched into the shadow of the atom bomb. It begins with a letter. Not from you, but from another scientist, Leo Szilard. He's frightened. He's heard rumors that German physicists are pursuing a new kind of weapon, one that splits atoms and could split cities. He comes to you not for your engineering, but for your name, your gravity, your voice, and you agree. You write to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The language is careful, the tone urgent. You explain briefly the possibility of nuclear fission and the catastrophic energy it could unleash. You don't want war. You never have. But you believe that not warning would be worse. That one letter sets in motion a chain you will never be able to stop. The Manhattan Project begins. You are not invited to participate. Some say it's because of your pacifist history. Others fear your ties to Europe. You don't argue. You're relieved. You don't want to build death, even if your equation made it imaginable. E. Giros MC2. Simple, clean, poetic. You wrote it to explain the elegance of the cosmos. But now, it hums in factories beneath mountains. It beats in the heart of a weapon. When you first hear of the Trinity test, the world's first detonation, you are silent for a long time. Others call it success. You call it sorrow. You say, it has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. And when Hiroshima happens, then Nagasaki, something inside you, shifts. You wander your house more. You write fewer letters. You turn to older books, philosophy, ethics, Goethe. You don't deny your role, but you feel the weight of unintended consequence. You are not guilty, but you are linked. People want your opinion. Reporters ask if you're proud. You reply, if I had known, I would have become a watchmaker. You speak often of peace now more than ever. You join organizations. You plead for international arms control. You write to world leaders, sometimes desperately, sometimes poetically. You meet with Gandhi. You correspond with Bertrand Russell. You warn of a future where humanity builds what it cannot unbuild. Still, some call you a hypocrite, a man who helped light the match and now condemns the flame. You do not defend yourself. You simply keep walking, keep writing, keep warning. One evening, you sit on your back porch in Princeton watching the sun fall behind bare trees. A student visits, eager, breathless, with theories and admiration. He tells you he wants to follow in your footsteps. You smile gently and say, then walk with care. The footprints are deeper than they look. At night you dream more vividly of stars, of paper that crumples into wings, of children laughing in languages you don't understand. You wake often before dawn and write ideas that you never send, never publish. Just thoughts, like messages to the void. You still believe in beauty, in logic, in the grand design. But now you temper every discovery with a question. Should we not? Just can we? You speak at universities about ethics in science. You tell the young not only how to think, but how to feel responsibly about what they make. You quote poets now, almost as often as physicists. Your hair grows wilder, your steps slower, but your voice, when it comes, still carries the hush of wonder. You once imagined riding a beam of light. Now you imagine the kind of world that beam should shine upon. You don't regret the science. You never will. But you wish the world had understood it differently. And that's the heartbreak, isn't it? You gave them truth, but they asked for power. You've spent your life peeling back the veil of reality, only to find, at the edge of every answer, another mystery waiting with open arms. You're older now, your eyes softer, your hands more deliberate, but your mind, it's still restless, still prowling, still asking. You sit at your desk beneath a window where afternoon light drips in slow golden lines. On the page before you, there's no war, no weapon, just math, just wonder. You're wrestling with a riddle that refuses to behave quantum mechanics. It's beautiful, and it drives you mad. The equations work. Predictive power undeniable. Quantum theory explains the behavior of particles, electrons, photons. It's responsible for entire branches of modern technology, but it lacks something you hold sacred determinism. It says the universe doesn't follow strict rules, it follows probabilities. That particles jump, vanish, appear, exist, and unexist all without cause. That observation changes reality. That measurement creates the outcome. You cannot accept this. You once said, God does not play dice with the universe. It becomes your most quoted line, sometimes admired, sometimes mocked. You clarify again and again you're not speaking of religion. You're speaking of order, of law, of a universe that should make sense. You debate Niels Bohr endlessly. In person, in letters and lectures, he argues for uncertainty. You argue for clarity. He says the observer collapses the wave function. You say the moon exists, whether we look at it or not. Your arguments aren't angry, but they are fierce, philosophical, almost theological. You spar with Bohr the way poets spar over truth earnestly, endlessly, with the full weight of belief behind every word. Meanwhile, the world changes without waiting. Quantum mechanics continues to flourish. The younger generation reveres Bohr, Heisenberg, Dirac. They admire you too, but now more like a monument than a leader. You are the past, they say, not the future. You nod. You disagree silently, because you still believe that truth is not a flicker, but a flame. Something steady, something real. You call quantum theory incomplete, and so you return to the equations again and again, trying to find a hidden variable, a secret thread that restores logic beneath the fuzz. But the thread never reveals itself. Still, you don't stop. One afternoon, a graduate student visits you, nervous sweating, prepared for a grilling. Instead, you offer him tea and ask him what he believes. He stumbles. You listen. When he asks you why you keep working at problems no one else believes can be solved, you smile and say, because it still might be. In moments like these, you don't sound like a physicist. You sound like a mystic, a quiet monk in the Church of Reason, still tracing the edges of divinity through numbers. You write more essays now, short ones, long ones, letters you never send, thoughts you never share. You wonder often whether understanding will ever be complete, whether the questions you asked as a boy about light, about time, have truly been answered, or whether they've only been echoed back in more complicated forms. You read Spinoza. You find comfort in his idea of God, not a being, but a presence. not a judge, but a structure, an order. You're asked in an interview what kind of religion you follow. You reply, I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the harmony of what exists. It becomes another famous quote, another simplification of something you've never stopped trying to articulate. In your notebooks, now yellowed with age, you keep sketching models, trying to build a theory that doesn't leave the universe to chance. You scribble equations in the margins of letters. You dream of symmetry, elegance, completion. You once said, the eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility. And that's what keeps you going, not certainty, but the sacred possibility of certainty. Even now, even at this age, even with the world moving on from your vision, you still believe there's something hidden, something simple, something beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for the next person who dares to ask better questions. The chalk no longer glides as quickly beneath your fingers. Your handwriting, once firm and deliberate, now trembles like the edge of a candle flame. But the symbols still come sometimes at night, when the house is quiet sometimes, in the half-sleep between thought and dream. You still reach for paper. You still reach for truth. You're in your Princeton study, surrounded by familiar clutter. Books piled like toppling theories. Letters you meant to answer. A violin propped in the corner quietly resting. There's no great system here, just a map of your mind scattered across wood and dust and ink. To the untrained eye, it's chaos. But to you, it's home. You rise earlier these days, not because you want to, but because sleep comes less often and dreams grow heavier. You sit by the window with weak tea and stronger thoughts. The birds chirp like equations waiting to be solved. You watch them flit from branch to branch, and you wonder not what they're doing, but why they do it so beautifully. You're still working on the unified field theory. Still, after decades, after applause and doubt and silence and fame, you cannot let it go. You believe truly stubbornly that nature is not stitched together by chance, but by meaning. That all of this relativity, light gravity quantum fuzz, must fold back into a single curve, a single language, a harmony so perfect it explains itself. You draft new variations of old equations. You sketch diagrams that drift into abstraction. At times, they look more like constellations than formulas. Sometimes, even you don't recognize what you've written the next morning. But that's all right. You're not chasing recognition. You're chasing closure. In public, they still quote you, still print your picture, still invite you to speak. You decline more often now. Your sentences grow slower, not weaker, just quieter, more distilled. In private, you write letters no one will read. Some to old friends, long past. Some to Maya, your sister whom you adored. Some to Mileva, whom you failed. A few to your sons, who grew up like distant planets, always visible, rarely close. You don't blame them. You once said that solitude is painful when you're young, but delicious when you're older. Now you savor it like a final cup of dark coffee. Bittersweet rich, and a little too cold by the time you remember to drink it. Visitors come and go. Some students' eyes full of reverence. Journalists still ask about the bomb. You always answer the same, I helped with a letter. Nothing more. The physics was inevitable. The choice was not. They scribble it down, but they never quite hear the ache. And your violin, how gently you lift it these days. How softly the bow touches string. You play not to be heard. You play because the notes help shape the silence. Sometimes you laugh to yourself. About time. About how you once proved it wasn't absolute. about how now, in these final days, it feels slower and faster all at once. You swear hours vanish like soap bubbles, yet minutes, especially in the night, stretch longer than light years. You write one last note to a colleague, a thought about the curvature of space near singularities. The words are smudged. You rewrite them, smudge them again. Eventually, you leave the page unfinished. It always ends that way. One evening, you rest in bed, with a pad on your lap, still writing in German. The nurse asks what you're doing. You reply, trying to finish before the universe does. She doesn't understand. You smile anyway. The pain grows sharper. The doctors speak in clinical tones. You refuse surgery. It is tasteless, you say, to prolong life artificially. You don't fear death. Not really. You've watched stars burn and vanish. You've seen how light bends, how time warps. You've suspected all along that endings are just coordinates points on a curved map. And then one night in the quiet before dawn, you drift. No speeches, no last-minute revelations, just a deep breath and release. Your notes scatter on the desk. Your violin rests beside an unsent letter. And outside your window, the stars continue shining, some of them still carrying your name. The world mourns gently, like rain falling on old stone. Newspapers print your face beside headlines that call you a genius, a prophet, the last great thinker of an age. Strangers light candles. Children ask who you were. Physicists whisper your equations like scripture. And across the quiet corners of Earth, a question rises in the stillness. What did it mean to live as Albert Einstein? But you are far from all that now. You are not a face in a frame. You are not a formula etched in a textbook. You are not a bust in a hallway or a quote on a coffee mug. You are something softer, something quieter. You are the boy who stared at a compass and asked why it moved. You are the dreamer who tried to ride on a beam of light. You are the father who fumbled his way through affection. You are the exile who watched his homeland dissolve into hatred. You are the thinker who refused to let silence mean surrender. And now the silence has returned, not the silence of rejection, but of rest, of completion. No unfinished proof, no final theory, just peace. The room in Princeton sits quiet. Your papers remain. Your coat still hangs by the door. Somewhere your last notebook lies open to a page of curves that no one else can quite decode, but they don't need to. That was never the point. You didn't ask to be understood. You asked the world to wonder, and it still does. In labs across the globe, your ideas bend lasers and shape satellites. In lecture halls, your face flickers across projectors as voices recite your revelations. In quiet bedrooms, children read your name and imagine light as something they too can chase. You have become more than one man's mind. You are part of the language the universe now uses to explain itself. And maybe, just maybe, that's all you ever wanted. You once said, a human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. You believed that love, beauty, and curiosity were not luxuries, but clues threads back to the design behind it all. So as the light bends once more through time, through memory, through all the places your mind once wandered, we follow it. We follow you. Not to worship, not to weep, but to remember what it means to ask. To pause before the ordinary and say, why does it move? To believe that behind the mystery, there is meaning. And behind the silence, there is still something listening. So now, breathe gently. You've traveled far tonight through theory, through exile, through laughter and loneliness, and back again. You've held the universe in your hands, and now you let it go. Let your shoulders sink into the bed. Let your thoughts soften. Let the stars resume their long conversation without needing your answers tonight. Because even now, even here, your light is still traveling.